Frog Prince. In olden times, when if you made a wish, it would always come true, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful. But the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, which has seen so much, was astonished whenever it shone in her face. Close by the king's castle lay a great dark forest, and under an old lime tree in the forest was a well. And when the day was very warm, the king's child went out into the forest and sat down by the side of the cool fountain. And when she was dull, she took a golden ball and threw it up on high and caught it. And this ball was her favourite playing thing. Now it so happened that on one occasion the princess's golden ball did not fall into the little hand which she was holding up for it, but onto the ground beyond, and rolled straight into the water. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes, but it vanished, and the well was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. On this she began to cry, and cry louder and louder, and could not be comforted. And as she was complaining, someone said to her, "What troubles you, king's daughter? You weep so that even a stone would show pity." She looked round to the side from whence the voice came, and saw a frog stretching forth its thick, ugly head from the water. "Ah, old water splasher, is it you?" said she. "I am weeping for my golden ball, which has fallen into the well." "Be quiet, and do not weep," answered the frog. "I can help thee." "But what wilt thou give me?" "Whatever you will have, dear frog," said she. "My clothes, my pearls and jewels, and even the golden crown which I'm wearing." The frog answered, "I do not care for clothes, thy pearls and jewels, or thy golden crown. But if you will love me, and let me be thy companion and playfellow, and sit by thee at thy little table, and eat off thy little golden plate, and drink out of thy little cup, and sleep in thy bed, if thou wilt promise me this, I will go down below, and bring thee thy golden ball up again." "Oh yes," said she, "I promise thee all you wish, if you will but bring my ball back again." She, however, thought, "How silly that frog does talk. He lives in the water with the other frogs and croaks, and can be no companion to any human being." But the frog, when he had received this promise, put his head into the water and sank down, and in a short while came swimming up again with the ball in his mouth, and threw it onto the grass. The king's daughter was delighted to see her pretty plaything once more, and picked it up and ran away with it. "Wait, wait," said the frog. "Take me with thee." But what did it avail him to scream his croak, croak after her as loudly as he could? She did not listen to it, but ran home and soon forgot the poor frog, who was forced to go back into his well once more. The next day, when she had seated herself at table with the king and all the courtiers, and was eating from her little golden plate, something came creeping splish, splash, up the marble staircase, and when it had got to the top, it knocked at the door and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." She ran to see who was outside, but when she opened the door, there sat the frog in front of it. Then she slammed the door to in great haste, sat down to dinner again, and was quite frightened. "My child, what art thou so afraid of? Is there perchance a giant outside who wants to carry thee away?" "Ah, no," replied she. "It is no giant, but a disgusting frog."
"What does a frog want with you?"
"Ah, dear father, yesterday, as I was in the forest sitting by the well playing, my golden ball fell into the water, and because I cried so, the frog brought it out again for me, and because he so insisted, I promised him he should be my companion, but I never thought he would be able to come out of his water. And now he is outside there, and wants to come into me." In the meantime, it knocked a second time and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me. Dost thou not know what thou said to me yesterday by the cool waters of the fountain? Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." Then said the king,
"That which you have promised you must do. Go and let him in."
She went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in and followed her, step by step, to her chair. There he sat and cried, "Lift me up beside you." She delayed, until at last the king commanded her to do it. When the frog was once on the chair, he wanted to be on the table. And when he was on the table, he said, "Now push your little golden plate nearer to me, that we may eat together." She did this, but it was easy to see that she did not do it willingly. The frog enjoyed what he ate, but almost every mouthful she took choked her. At length he said, "I have eaten and am satisfied. Now I am tired. Carry me into thy little room and make thy little silken bed ready, and we will both lie down and go to sleep." The king's daughter began to cry, for she was afraid of the cold frog, which she did not like to touch, and which was now to sleep in her pretty, clean little bed. But the king grew angry and said, "He who helped thee when thou wert in trouble ought not afterwards to be despised by thee." So she took hold of the frog with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs, and put him in the corner. But when she was in bed, he crept up to her and said, "I am tired, and want to sleep as well as thou. Lift me up, or I will tell thy father." Then she was terribly angry, and took him and threw him with all her might against the wall. "Now you will be quiet, you horrible little frog," said she. But when he fell down, he was no frog, but a king's son with beautiful kind eyes. He, by her father's will, was now her dear companion and husband. Then he told her how he had been bewitched by a wicked witch, and how no one could have delivered him from the well but herself, and that tomorrow they would go together to his kingdom. Then they went to sleep, and next morning when the sun awoke them, a carriage came driving up with 8 white horses, which had white ostrich feathers on their heads, and were harnessed with golden chains. And behind stood the young king's servant, Faithful Henry. Faithful Henry had been so unhappy when his master was changed into a frog, that he had caused 3 iron bands to be laid round his heart, in case it should burst with grief and sadness. The carriage was to conduct the young king into his kingdom. Faithful Henry helped them both in, and placed himself behind again, and was full of joy because of this wonderful end to their troubles. And when they had driven a part of the way, the king's son heard a cracking behind him as if something had broken. So he turned round and cried, "Henry, the carriage is breaking." "No, master, it is not the carriage, it is a band from my heart, which was put there in my great pain when you were a frog and imprisoned in the well. Again and once again, while they were on their way, something cracked, and each time the king's son thought the carriage was breaking. But it was only the bands which were springing from the heart of the faithful Henry, because his master was set free and was happy. Rapunzel. There was once a man and a woman who had long wished for a child, but without any luck. At last the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. They had a little window at the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared go into it because it belonged to an enchantress who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day, the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden, when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful plant called Rapunzel, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. She quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What troubles you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't eat some of the Rapunzel, which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die." The man who loved her thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, better bring her some of the Rapunzel, let it cost you what it will." When it was getting dark, he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of the Rapunzel plant and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it and ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of the evening, therefore, he let himself down again. But when he had clambered down the wall, he was struck with terror, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How can you dare," said she with an angry look, "climb down into my garden and steal my Rapunzel like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Ah," answered he, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your Rapunzel from the window and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not got some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened and said to him, "If you speak the truth, I will allow you to take away with you as much Rapunzel as you will. Only I make one condition. You must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world. It will be treated well, and I will care for it like a mother." The man, in his terror, agreed to everything. And when the child was born, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest, and it had neither stairs nor doors, but right at the top was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair for me." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hooks of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 yards down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two, it happened that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then he heard a song, which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed her time in letting her sweet voice sing out. The king's son wanted to climb up to her and looked for the door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once, when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and he heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair for me." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder that leads to the top, I too will try my fortune," said he. And the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Immediately the hair fell down and the prince climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man, such as her eyes had never yet beheld, came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had let him have no rest, and he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked if she would take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He will love me more than old Dame Gothel the enchantress does." And she said yes, and laid her hand on his. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a ball of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it, and when that is ready I will climb down, and you will take me on your horse." They agreed that until that time he should come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this, until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment." "Ah, you wicked child!" cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful hair, wrapped it twice around her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snap, they were cut off, and the lovely braids lay on the ground. And she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day that she cast out Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braids of hair, which she had cut off, to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me," she let the hair down. The king's son climbed, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and poisonous looks. "Ah!" she cried mockingly, You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. The cat has got it, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again." The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered quite blind about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did naught but weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at last came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as he did before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented. The 6 Swans. A king was once hunting in a great wood, and he hunted the game so eagerly that none of his courtiers could follow him. When evening came on, he stood still and looked round him, and he saw that he had quite lost himself. He sought a way out, but could find none. Then he saw an old woman with a shaking head coming towards him, but she was a witch. "Good woman," he said to her, "can you not show me the way out of the wood?" "Oh, certainly, Sir King," she replied. "I can quite well do that, but on one condition, which if you do not fulfill, you will never get out of the wood and will die of hunger." "What is the condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is so beautiful that she has not her equal in the world, and is well fitted to be your wife. If you will make her lady queen, I will show you the way out of the wood." The king, in his anguish of mind, consented, and the old woman led him into her little house, where her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king as if she were expecting him, and he saw that she certainly was very beautiful. But she did not please him, and he could not look at her without a secret feeling of horror. As soon as he had lifted the maiden onto his horse, the old woman showed him the way, and the king reached his palace where the wedding was celebrated. The king had already been married once before, and had by his first wife 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl, whom he loved more than anything in the whole world. And now, because he was afraid that their stepmother might not treat them well and might do them harm, he put them in a lonely castle that stood in the middle of the wood. It lay so hidden, and the way to it was so hard to find, that he himself could not have found it out had not a wise woman given him a reel of thread which possessed a marvellous property. When he threw it before him, it unwound itself and showed him the way. The king went so often to visit his dear children that the queen was offended at his absence. She grew curious and wanted to know what he had to do quite alone in the wood. She gave his servants a great deal of money, and they betrayed the secret to her, and also told her of the reel of thread which alone could point out the way. She had no rest now till she found out where the king guarded the reel, and then she made some little white shirts, and as she had learned from her witch mother, sewed an enchantment in each of them. And when the king had ridden off, she took the little shirts and went into the wood, and the reel showed her the way. The children, who saw someone coming in the distance, thought it was their dear father coming to them, and sprang to meet him very joyfully. Then she threw over each one a little shirt, which when it had touched their bodies, changed them into swans, and they flew away over the forest. The queen went home quite satisfied, and thought she had got rid of her stepchildren. But the girl had not run to meet with her brothers, and she knew nothing of her. The next day the king came to visit his children, but he found no one but the girl. "Where are your brothers?" asked the king. "Alas, dear father," she answered, "they have gone away and left me all alone." And she told him that looking out of her little window, she had seen her brothers flying over the wood in the shape of swans, and she showed him the feathers which they had let fall in the yard and which she had collected. The king mourned, but he did not think that the queen had done the wicked deed, and as he was afraid the maiden would also be taken from him, he wanted to take her with him. But she was afraid of the stepmother, and begged the king to let her stay just one night more in the castle in the wood. The poor maiden thought, "My home is no longer here. I will go and seek my brothers." And when night came, she fled away into the forest. Then she saw a little hut, went in, and found a room with 6 little beds. She was afraid to lie down on one, so she crept under one of them, lay on the hard floor, and was going to spend the night there. But when the sun had set, she heard a noise, and 6 swans flying in at the window. They stood on the floor and blew at one another, and blew all their feathers off, and their swan skin came off like a shirt. Her brothers were not less delighted than she to see their little sister again, but their joy did not last long. "You cannot stay here," they said to her. "This is a den of robbers. If they were to come here and find you, they would kill you." "Could you not protect me?" asked the little sister. "No," they answered, "for we can only lay aside our swan skins for a quarter of an hour every evening. For this time we regain our human forms, but then we are changed into swans again." Then the little sister cried and said, "Can you not be freed?" "Oh no," they said. "The conditions are too hard. You must not speak or laugh for 6 years, and must make in that time 6 shirts for us out of star flowers. If a single word comes out of your mouth, all your labour is in vain." And when the brothers had said this, the quarter of an hour came to an end, and they flew away out of the window as swans. But the maiden had determined to free her brothers, even if it should cost her her life. She left the hut, went into the forest, climbed a tree, and spent the night there. The next morning she went out, collected star flowers, and began to sew. She could speak to no one, and she had no wish to laugh, so she sat there, looking only at her work. When she had lived there some time, it happened that the king of the country was hunting in the forest, and his hunters came to the tree on which the maiden sat. They called to her and said, "Who are you?" But she gave no answer. "Come down to us," they said. "We will do you no harm." But she shook her head silently. As they pressed her further with questions, she threw them the golden chain from her neck. But they did not leave off, and so she threw them her girdle, and when this was no use, her garters, and then her dress. The huntsman would not leave her alone, but climbed the tree, lifted the maiden down, and led her to the king. The king asked, "Who are you? What are you doing up in that tree?" But she answered nothing. He asked her in all the languages he knew, but she remained dumb as a fish. Because she was so beautiful, however, the king's heart was touched, and he was seized with a great love for her. He wrapped her up in his cloak, placed her before him on his horse, and brought her to his castle. There he had her dressed in rich clothes, and her beauty shone out as bright as the day, but not a word could be drawn from her. He set her at his table by his side, and her modest ways and behaviour pleased him so much that he said, "I will marry this maiden, and none other in the world." And after some days, he married her. But the king had a wicked stepmother, who was displeased with the marriage, and said wicked things of the young queen. "Who knows who this girl is?" she said. "She cannot speak, and is not worthy of a king." After a year, when the queen had her first child, the old mother took it away from her. Then she went to the king and said that the queen had killed it. The king would not believe it, and would not allow any harm to be done to her. But she sat quietly, sewing at the shirts, and troubling herself about nothing. The next time she had a child, the wicked stepmother did the same thing. But the king could not make up his mind to believe her. He said, "She is too sweet and good to do such a thing as that. If she were not dumb and could defend herself, her innocence would be proved." But when the third child was taken away, and the queen was again accused, and could not utter a word in her own defence, the king was obliged to give her over to the law, which decreed that she must be burnt to death. When the day came on which the sentence was to be executed, it was the last day of the 6 years in which she must not speak or laugh. And now she had freed her dear brothers from the power of the enchantment. The 6 shirts were done. There was only the left sleeve wanting to the last. When she was led to the stake, she laid the shirts on her arm, and as she stood on the pile and the fire was about to be lighted, she looked around her and saw 6 swans flying through the air. Then she knew that her release was at hand, and her heart danced for joy. The swans fluttered round her and hovered so low that she could throw the shirts over them. When they had touched them, the swan skins fell off, and her brothers stood before her, living well and beautiful. Only the youngest had a swan's wing instead of his left arm. They embraced and kissed each other, and the queen went to the king, who was standing by in great astonishment, and began speaking to him, saying, "Dearest husband, now I can speak to you and tell you openly that I am innocent and have been falsely accused." She told him of the old woman's deceit, and how she had taken the 3 children away and hidden them. Then they were fetched, to the great joy of the king, and the wicked mother came to no good end. But the king and queen, with their 6 brothers, lived many years in happiness and peace.